Okay, dinosaurs. Could there some still be out there? No, I'm not talking about like a giant T Rex or something like that. But there are stories around the world of creatures resembling what we would interpret as, dinosaurs. So you've got, I think it's Mokele. I'm probably pronouncing that completely wrong, and I'll have to have a look. That's like a little dinosaur that's supposedly inhabited. I say little; it's meant to be quite big. So there's stories of it like killing hippos and things like that. But it's meant to inhabit like the Congo. Now, there is actual little documentaries on this. Maybe the Discovery Channel did something years ago where they went looking for it, and there is some documented expeditions of people trying to find this thing. I think what intrigued people was there was all these tribes that a lot of them pretty remote, uncontacted, that spoke of these creatures. Now, we know that the stories of rhinos originally probably sounded like a unicorn, didn't it? And it turned out it was a rhino. So I get it. It could just be another animal that they're mixing up. But when these are people who didn't have, say, the knowledge that we had, and I think they even spoke about it. Again, I'll have to check this, having like spikes on it. So like these spikes on its back and its neck. Now they didn't discover that these types of dinosaurs had this until later on. I believe it was after these guys had spoke about it. Again, could be chatting about rubbish there. So there's some interesting little nuggets there when you look into it. That go, "Oh, that's interesting." There's some legitimate people went out there looking for it, and there is creatures out there that we didn't know existed. Pandas. It took them ages to find pandas, didn't it? I believe it was a long time. And maybe when they did find one, it took them a long time to find another one. There's plenty of animals in this country, like badgers. I've only ever seen one like once, and that was when I went looking for deer with a guy who was trained to do it, and we found badgers. But other than that, I'd only ever seen a dead one outside the road. So now there's that. Yeah, would you ever find a dead one? But we're talking about dense jungle, dense unexplored jungle that people like you and me would go into, and we'd be dead within days if we're lucky. Like, probably dead within a few days and lost and never seen again, eaten, bitten, whatever. And there's a lot of war goes on in those areas as well, so it's very hard for people to get in to explore it because it's such a disputed part of the world still. So it's hard for people to get in there and to get passes to explore it. So yeah, that's an interesting one. There's these stories of this creature that's in that jungle that resembles a dinosaur, and there's plenty of people like who live there who talk about it. Now there could be some motivation, tourist motivation. There could be, they've cottoned on. At first, it might have been, they told some stories, some creatures, and they realised these guys would pay them, and they cottoned on and they started, working it a little bit. Like that's a human thing to do. We can all be guilty of running a little, a little hustle here and there. So maybe that's what it was. Okay, so we've got there's that one. Then we've got the one that's close to home, which is the Loch Ness monster. So the Loch Ness monster, there's been stories of that for centuries. Now that would mean that we'd have to have a breeding population because it can't be something that's just lived forever. So you'd have to have a few of them. So then you think, would you have more sightings? Now I've been to Loch Ness. It's a big place. It's a big body of water. It's very deep. Depends on these things that they need to surface, any mammals, whatever. There's all these different questions. And again, there's a lot of stories dating back, but there's also explanations, i.e. the famous surgeon's photo, which was a complete hoax, and they showed how they did it. You've also got that the stories of where there was circuses around there, and they would let the elephants swim in it. So the hump and the trunk was the head and the trunk. That was the neck and the hump of the animal, and that's what people were seeing. It was actually elephants, not. And then sturgeon. So I believe there's some big sturgeon in there, and as people say, if they see something, they might mistake it. They just, what your eyes are like. They play tricks on you, don't they? You see things, and you're like, you look again, you're like, how did I imagine that? But, your eyes can play tricks. So people, especially when you're around there and you're into the lure of it all, there's a museum, there's a tourist industry. So then you have things like radar blips, you have things on Google Earth. There's there's sightings, and it's really watched now. There's a lot of people have cameras on it all the time. I think there's a camera you can log onto and you can do Nessie watch, and they've probably had a few sightings as well. But a lot of times, probably just bits of wood in it, or fish, or there's any number of explanations for it. Like I seen a Google Earth one, and it looked like this big thing, but then someone explained how Google Earth takes these images, and it's more than likely just a boat. It's not taking a still image; it's just a boat over a period of time, snapshots grouped together, and it looks like something. It's actually just the tail of a boat. I might be trying rubbish there, but I believe that's what it was. Yeah, so there's all these people with eyes on it and all these things watching it, and you think we'd have some good evidence by now, wouldn't you? I still want to. There's the idea that the caves are down there. There's caves that connect to the sea and or underground water. I can't remember which. There's the River Ness that goes into it, but then the theory is that there's like creatures swim up that like eels. But I feel like it was quite a shallow river. That when you go through River Ness itself, I'm sure it's shallow. Again, I'm drawing on memory here from when I was a kid, so I could be wrong. But there's all sorts of theories to explain it, and there's not a lot of good evidence. Like I said, there's a lot of talk about it, but could it have survived? I think what's interesting is that there is multiple lakes around the world with similar stories. I don't think they're all as old as Loch Ness. Some might be. I think you've got like Lake Champion. Is that America or Canada? There's I think there's China, there's Russia, there is stories all around the world. I think there's another one in England somewhere as well. Like Devon Way. There's quite a few stories of these serpents inhabiting bodies of water. Now, a lot of it could probably go back to like folklore and religious things, and maybe people try to scare their kids to stay away from water. There's all sorts of rational explanations for it. And I think in the case of the lake monsters, I think it's more likely a tall tale in it. Like when it comes to like the dinosaur in the Congo, I'm a bit like, well, they found some stuff that they didn't think was there. It's very unexplored. It's very hard for people to get into it. There's even a guy on Joe Rogan's like comedian who decided to go looking for it just on a bit of a madden. And I'm sure he had to lie, say he was like a missionary or something just to get into the country because there was like civil war going on. So imagine like, there's just parts of this world that aren't as safe as we like to think they are. And like you go there, it's not worth the risk, is it? To go looking for a dinosaur. For one, that's your reputation. But also you might get killed for doing so. So there's not a lot of people rushing to do it. But I can be swayed to go, maybe there's something. When it comes to the lake monsters, I just feel like, God, people have been looking at this thing for a long time. The last interesting bit I'll leave on that is that when I was a kid, I had access to this reprinted paper from D-Day. I was doing a report for history, and I think it was like my granddad had these old papers. Like reprints, but like old papers. It was all about D-Day. It was on the D-Day landings. In that paper, there was a story, and I don't know if it was at Loch Lomond, it may have been, but there was a story of a sea creature being washed up there, and it had been collected and sent, let's say Edinburgh University, I might be wrong there, or Glasgow, but it had been sent to be investigated. I could never find anything on it on the internet ever, but it was in this paper. I remember reading it. I remember even going on forums and asking people, like, has anyone heard of this thing? What was it? And I never got an answer. There is the odd video of things being washed up at sea that resemble like a Nessie-like creature as well. Maybe. But it's a push, in it. Again, there's just that kid in me that wants to believe that there's things out there that we don't know about just yet. And then you could go really weird, couldn't you, and say that maybe it's an interdimensional being. Let's not go there. It's not the time of day for that. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. A little rant on dinosaurs. I don't know. Maybe they are. Highly unlikely, but it's a fun thing to think about, isn't it?